almost really an accomplishment because he's trying.
In the previous video, Dr. Tomlinson talked about connecting with students as an essential first step to ensuring that students learn and succeed. In this video, Dr. Tomlinson will continue her examination of the essential elements of differentiation, including what she calls the 3 R's: relationships, relevance, and rigor. She will also present examples of how differentiation can be used in classrooms to humanize, to individualize, and to respond to students' strengths and needs. And now, Dr. Tomlinson.
I want to share a little book with you that you can actually download from the internet. And I was just noticing with Marcia over here, I'm always meticulously careful not to put this stuff in handouts. And I somehow left this whole thing in there plus 2 cartoons. I must have been in really good shape when I was handing this one in. But I want to share this with you because I think it's interesting on several levels. This was done by a couple of teachers. And they wrote the little book because they saw this thing happening in their school. And they were worried about it. They were seeing kids who were disengaged and being further disengaged because no adults were connecting with them. So here's the little book, If She Only Knew Me. If she only knew that I had to get my little brother up and ready for school this morning, she wouldn't have fussed at me for being a few minutes late. If she only knew that I didn't get to eat supper last night, she wouldn't have taken the extra cereal that Chris gave me at breakfast. She said only 1 cereal for each student. That's the rule at this school. If she only knew that I had to watch my little brother last night while my mama was at the park with her friend, she wouldn't have punished me for not getting my homework done. If she only knew that I like to make stuff in science class, she would let us make rockets like Ms. Bagan's class. Instead, we read about rockets from a book. If she only knew that her rules are as long as the lines at the city pool, she would make a shorter list that we could remember. If she only knew that my daddy left me and my mama when I was 2, she would stop telling me that she's going to call my daddy for a conference. If she only knew that I get really upset when Leonard talks about my mama, her biggest rule would be no talking about other people's mamas. If she only knew how much I love to draw, she would make me the class poster maker. Instead, she doesn't let me because my handwriting isn't so great. If she only knew that I need to talk if I'm going to learn, she wouldn't send me to the principal's office so much. She says my talking is disruptive in the classroom. She's the only person talking. In my opinion, that's disruptive. If she only knew that when she gets mad and screams at the class, it scares me. Last year, Ms. Stooley never raised her voice at me. Ms. Stooley was quiet as a crook after midnight. When Ms. Stooley talked, kids listened. If she only knew that some of the boys are trying to get me to join their gang, she would help me say no. If she only knew how much I like to run, she would have told me about last week's track team sign up. If she only knew how much I need my mentor here at school, she would let me see him more. He thinks I'm cool. If she only knew that I know stuff that she doesn't know, I know where to get bus tokens, I know what time the city bus passes the school, I know the best place to buy a pop, I know what time the sprinkler comes on at the park, I know what it means to be dissed, I know how to live without electricity, I know how to entertain an entire room of people with my personality and humor, I know what churches have the best rummage sales. I know how to stay safe in my neighborhood. I know how to keep my clothes from being stolen at the laundromat. I know a lot more than she thinks I do. I don't think any of us want to have that happen to the kid. I don't know many teachers who say, who cares? Trouble is, it's hard to find that time for the friendly listening and for them to be able to talk to us and to realize that the kid learns better by moving and that this kid has to learn by talking. And that's part of what differentiation is, just trying to put the mechanisms in place to make that happen better. Dennis Litke, who's kind of an interesting fellow, says he's in a school full of kids that have disengaged. He says, you know, guys, I'd really like to tell teachers that the only thing we have to do is to get kids to learn more stuff, think smarter, pass the state standards test. I'd like to say that's what our job really is, but he says in our school, with this population of disengaged kids, we've come to discover that school really is about the 3 R's. But the 3 R's that it's really about are relationships, relevance, and rigor. And then he says, here's the deal, troops. You cannot expect, you can't have a relationship with, or make things relevant for, or expect rigor from a kid you don't know. And so this getting to know them is critical. If I don't know you, it's hard to have a relationship. If I don't know you, like that little boy, I don't know what would be relevant. I could do math relative to rummage sales and how you determine which rummage sales are better rummage sales than other ones if I knew that rummage sales were his chief point of bargaining and spending money. If I don't know that, I don't know to do it. And I can't expect rigor from a kid that I don't know the point of rigor for. And so both personally and academically, I have to get you sort of on my radar to kind of know where to go next. Arthur Powell makes this comment, and I think it's an important one for us to think about, especially the last line. And he says, caring teachers can help disengaged, passive, confused, or discouraged students become connected to school and become connected to learning. When these teachers make their commitments to students and subjects visible to kids, then some teachers turn out to be these stimulating people who breathe life into learning. They get respect as role models or mentors. Students develop lasting interest through teachers' enthusiastic representations of the subject, or they become interested in the subject because the teacher's enthusiastic for them. And a few become actual apprentices. Positive relationships with their instructors can motivate students when other incentives fail. And this is the punchline for me. Personalization should not be confused with social work. We're not saying all of us should become counselors and social workers and fix the universe. What we're saying is personalization is a necessity for us to succeed as teachers. For kids to learn, we have to make those connections with them. Katie Carson is a high school teacher that I was in the classroom of a couple of years ago, and she said something to me that was pretty interesting. I thought it was pretty gutsy. She was about a 5th-year teacher. And she said, you know what I've figured out about teaching now? I've figured out that with the exception of 1 or 2 kids in every class I teach, most of the kids don't give a happy hoot about my subject matter. They just are not running in saying, oh, please teach me Shakespeare this year. And there are a few kids who do. They're dying for some substance. But mostly kids aren't coming in saying, man, are you going to clarify quadratic equations? I'll be so psyched when you do that. Man, you mean we're really going to learn 200 new vocabulary words about outer space? What a kick. She said they really don't care. And here's what I figured out. I have to somehow make them care about me and about each other. And when I do that, that becomes a bridge that they'll walk over to the content. And so she said to her kids in the beginning of the year, you need to know that I think stories are pretty cool things. Let me ask you, how many of you, she said, would rather go out with somebody for an evening where when you sit down in the car, the kids said, you say, so how you doing? I'm fine. So what'd you do today? Oh, stuff. Well, what music you listening to? I don't know, whatever. You want to date that kid, or do you want to date the kid who, when you say, so how's stuff going, he says, let me tell you this weird thing that happened, you won't even believe it, and launches into a story. And then that leads you to another story, and then that leads that person to another story, and pretty soon you're telling each other stories, and the time goes really fast, and it's pretty interesting. And she said, I seldom have people say, no, just sign me up for that first kid, that'll be fine. Stories are our life. And she said, here's the deal. I'm going to tell you some of my stories and hope you'll tell me some of yours, and I'll even postpone a test for 10 or 15 minutes if somebody has a good story to tell. The deal is, however, if I postpone a test for 15 minutes, it had better be a good story. And she starts by sharing just a few of her stories with the kids, and they share a few silly things back. And after a while, when they get used to each other, she shares a few more personal stories, and they begin to share with her. And she says to them, you know what? Every story I tell you and every story you tell me is like every story we read in a book. They all begin once upon a time and every day until one day, and then until finally and ever since. And the kids compare their stories to the Shakespearean stories and the stories by Edgar Allan Poe and the boring ones that we had to read when we were in high school. And suddenly they get the drift that those writers are just telling us their stories too, and that we try them on just like we try on each other's stories to see where it sends us. I was in her class one day with a bunch of kids that really was Noah's Ark. She had kids in there that were ready for college and kids that were stuck back in 4th grade. And she was showing them going to show them some slides so that they would link art with stories. And I was looking at those kids, and again, I was struck by, I wonder how many 15-year-old kids want to look at museum artwork and then try to attach it to stories that seem like they came from a museum too. And she said to them, guys, tell me about your golden ages. And I thought, what do you mean your golden ages? They're 15, they haven't lived long enough to have a golden age. Every kid in that class could tell her about a golden moment in their life and what made that thing golden. And then she said, let's look at pictures where people draw their golden, what golden moments are. And they analyze those things. And then she said, what do you suppose stories from the golden age would be like? And they sort of hypothesized. And when the gangly old kid who looked like Ichabod Crane left the room, he said to her, so we're going to get to look at some more of that famous artwork tomorrow? That's pretty good stuff. And I thought to myself, had she not started with him and his golden ages, that wouldn't have been pretty good stuff, and he'd have choked to death on it. Again, it's that connection piece. However you do it. And it's easy to say, you know, she happened to be an English teacher. Of course you can do that in English. One of my favorite teachers was a woman named Margaret Work who used to teach with me where I taught for so long. And she was one of these people who had a great belief that all kids could learn advanced math. And so she would herd the whole batch of kids into Algebra 1 when they didn't think they were ready for it. And she'd start trying to teach them. And they'd get kind of frustrated, of course, because it gets a little hard. So she did many, many things to prove their success to them. But one of the things that she did was have the kids write math jeers. And the math jeers were sort of the negative version of cheers for the cheerleading squad. And you could write the jeer, you could put the jeer to music, you could do, you know, exercise to the jeer, you could bring in pom-poms and do the jeer, and different kids did different things. But when they got frustrated, she'd say, oh, okay, I think we need a little break here. Anybody got a jeer they want to offer today? And somebody could get up and do that little jeer thing for a minute, which of course all the kids learned instantly. And they'd get kids in there with pom-poms and jumping, and the kids would stand up and jump around with them and repeat the jeer, and they'd sit down and start working on the math, and what do you suppose happened? What purpose did it serve? Purposes. What do you think? Say it again. It validated their frustration. It's okay that you're frustrated. This stuff's hard. It's all right for it to be hard. Let's have a little fun with the fact that it's hard. And so it was okay to say, I don't get it. In fact, it turned into fun to say, I don't get it sometimes. What else might it serve?
Repetition. Refocus.
Show me where you are.
Refocus.
Say it again.
Refocus.
Absolutely, it was fascinating to watch. They'd be frustrated and want to slam the pencil down and ready to quit listening to her. And after they'd done that, the frustration was out and they were completely refocused and ready to go again. And it meant that she understood them as a person, and she wasn't rejecting the frustration. And so they were able to sort of tolerate that whole thing. You know, they pulled together as a class. And so if somebody was frustrated and somebody else wasn't, it was okay to be that way. It was an amazing thing to watch, just how that one little thing said to the kids, she cares about us, she gets us, she wants math to be fun, she's going to help turn us around. And it wasn't the jeer that was supposed to teach them the math, it just refocused them to kind of get ready to go again. So it can happen in any subject. How do we connect with kids? All of these are small things, and most of us do a couple of them. Question is, could you find a couple of more you could do that help you reach a little bit better? some of them that you haven't done that you might trade in for some that you do for a while. For me as a secondary teacher, I finally learned to do this and to take notes on Postit Notes about kids. And I'd put their name and the date at the top and then just write myself a note. Here's something she likes, or here's something he's frustrated about, or this is working in a group for her, or she needs more information about whatever. And I had a notebook that had class periods in it. You know, the first divider was for first period, second divider was for second period, and behind the divider I had a sheet of notebook paper with each kid's name on it. And I could take that Post-it note and slap it on the piece of paper, and it took no time to do that. And then every once in a while, I could flip through the notebook to see what I'd see. And if you're this different from me, don't tell me, because it would be really discouraging. But for me, if I saw something happen first period, I wouldn't have even remembered it sixth period, because so darn many things had happened during the day. But if I had that note and I could slap it on the paper, then I had it, and I could look back again. Those kinds of little things really can help. Questions or thoughts or anything else that you do that you would put on that list that really helps you connect with kids and let them know that you're connecting?
I do a lot of field trips with my students. I'm a science teacher for pre-K to 6, and especially the ones that are overnight, the retreats. We really get to know each other. They see me completely differently when they see me as a human being as well, not just the teacher in their class. They see me outside that role. Yeah. And so I find that just taking the learning in a new context and connecting in new contexts will really...
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and not all of us have the opportunity to do field trips with kids. Not all of us have the opportunity, certainly, to do overnight ones. But whatever it is that humanizes us, even if it's just plopping into the cafeteria once a month and you have to hold your nose to make yourself do it, and sitting down at a table with some kids and saying, I need a change of scenery, I'm going to eat lunch with you, and sort of sit there for a few minutes and chat with them. But yeah, that overnight field trip thing is a whole different universe. Yes?
I like to walk at lunch, and I walk with the kids. It not only gives me an opportunity to, and anybody's welcome. Sometimes I have 6 kids, sometimes I have 26 kids. But what I really enjoy is that the kids that I don't personally teach, I teach 5th grade, and we switch classes. So I know them, and I can get an insight into them because of their friendships with some of the kids that I do know. And then I feel a better connection to the entire group of 5th grade kids. And then I can also bounce ideas, things that I hear that maybe their teacher doesn't know, that they will share in our walk around the playground.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to do. I've not heard that one before, but you know, to walk is healthy in the first place. Get the kids to go with you, and it's, again, they're freed from the constraints of the classroom. You hear things you wouldn't hear, can make connections, share information. I think that's a wonderful thing to be able to do. I had a friend who used to let the kids sneak up the back stairs to come in her room in the morning, which was not allowed, and I'm sure the principal knew she did it, obviously. And teachers would say to her, gosh, it's the only time in the day you have free for yourself. You know, why do you let them do that? And she said, you know, that time with them opens so many doors. Kids come when they have problems. Kids come when something's funny to tell me. But she said one of the things that's systematic is kids who can't find space and time at home to do homework or can't get it right will come in and check with me. And she said teaching's easier, class is easier because more kids get it, more kids are getting it right. I think the message for those two things is to sort of find your own way to connect, whether it's field trips, walking, backstairs, sitting with them at lunch, taking notes, just something that continues to gather that data in a serious way and that the kids know it. We had a teacher who used to teach here in the summer for us, some with a summer program, who did this thing that was similar, that always fascinated me to watch. I watched it summer after summer, was never disappointed. He would get a class full of kids in, and he had made it a point to find out 1 or 2 things about each of the kids. It was abstract for them at that point. It was really not that he knew his name, but he knew there was a kid with this name who liked to play tennis and had 2 frogs at home or something. And the kids would come in and he'd sit them down and he'd ask them to say their names for him, what's first names. And he had just a good enough memory so that when he went around the room, when they went around the room and said the name once, he could say, okay, let me see if I can do it now, and he actually could. And they'd kind of go, ooh. And then he'd say, okay, tell me your last names with your first name. And then he'd go around and do that. And they were like, woo. And he'd say, you know, I think I'm kind of getting a handle on you. Let me go around and try this name and see if it gives me any insight into anything else. You're Danny Jones, and you like tennis, and you have 2 frogs at home, and the kid's going. And by the time he had done that with the class, you could just see reverence happening. And of course, half because they were middle schoolers, they thought there must be magic. But if not, then at least somehow this guy had found out about them before they showed up. And it was just really just that little teeny piece. And I don't mean to drive this into the ground, but honest to goodness, I think we overlook this piece in our busyness. And I think the connection piece is critical to differentiation. I want to add another little aspect to this for you just real quickly, and then we'll have to leave this here today. There's a woman named Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. If you've not read her book called Mindset, get it and see what you can do with it this summer. It's about parenting, and it's about athletics, and it's about business, and it's about teaching. Mindset has to do with how we perceive success. And Dweck has found, after many, many years of research replicated with other researchers in many settings, that we tend to look at where success and ability come from in one of 2 ways. Some of us have what she calls a fixed mindset. And if you have a fixed mindset, you really kind of have the notion that success comes from your genetics. You know, your dad's a lawyer and your mom's a doctor, and so how dumb can you be? And besides that, you live in a home where there are books, and you have vacations in the summer and plenty of experiences. And in school, there really is only so much we can do to override that. If you come from a place where your endowment is not so great and your experiences aren't so rich, I mean, we can do our best, but that's about all we can do. You just can't do too terribly much about that. Other folks have what she calls a growth mindset, or at other times she calls it a fluid mindset. And folks with a growth mindset say, you know where success comes from? It doesn't come from your genes. It comes because you work harder than anybody else, and you persist with things. And if any of you in my class will work with me, you can pretty much accomplish whatever you need to accomplish. Teachers can override stuff from kids' backgrounds. If you get to know kids, you find out pretty cool things about them, which are more likely to make you invest in them and are more likely to get them to attach to you, which then leads to that effort, which then leads to success. School, unfortunately, is a fixed mindset place. We have for decades now said, okay, just give us test data and we'll tell you who's smart and who's not. And we'll put the smart kids in one place and the not smart kids in another place. And most of the time, we'll make sure that those smart kids have really excellent teachers. But that won't happen quite as often for the kids who aren't in the smart crew. And then when we see that you're not so smart, well, we won't give you top drawer curriculum. We'll save that for the kids who are smart. We'll do a lot of drill and practice and stuff with you. Do you suppose there's any kid who's not comatose that doesn't understand when they're in a remedial room, that they're in a room full of kids that nobody believes in? You think kids miss that point? Having a fixed mindset is dangerous to a kid's health. And kids have it, and so do we. And when we connect with kids, meaning those little people start becoming human beings to us, we're much less willing to assume they can't do things, much more willing to assume that if we work with them and they work with us, they can get there. And so this mindset piece is another really, really important part of connecting with kids and propelling differentiation forward. Now tomorrow and the next day we're going to look at some other principles, and they probably are going to seem much more substantial to you, much more academic. But my hunch, and they're every one very important. If we let any of them down, we're sunk. But my hunch is that this notion of owning that kid and believing down to our toenails that that kid can do anything he or she needs to as long as they work with us and we work with them, I believe is a huge engine for differentiation.
As you reflect upon your own educational mindset and how it affects your personal approach to teaching, Keep in mind Dr. Tomlinson's comments on the importance of connecting with students, knowing them as individuals, and believing in their success potential. In the next video, Dr. Tomlinson will guide you in analyzing some classroom scenarios that will help you better understand how differentiated instruction can be applied in your own classroom.